All right, so hello, welcome, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you all for joining us again today for our webinar on Federated API Management, transitioning into a new era of APIM, the first episode of our new webinar series on Federated API Management. Let me briefly cover some logistics before we start. Please ask any questions throughout the session using the Q&A module of the Zoom client. And just so you know, as usual, we'll be recording this session and make it available on our website at APIIDA.com/webinars for those who cannot join us today, so you can always listen to the recording. Now let's get started on our topic for today. As said, Federated API Management transitioning into a new era of APIM. Let me hand it over to APIIDA's CTO, Markus Müller, who will cover today's topic. Markus, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Armin. So also from my side, a very warm welcome to this first episode of our new series. As we have done in the last quarter, our series on API Ops, we now want to follow up with a more strategic topic. And so why are we talking about a new era of API management? So up until now, if you have been talking to some people in the API management scene, what they basically told you is that you have to have full lifecycle API management. And best of the case, you only have one of them, right? So you have one full lifecycle management that manages all of your APIs through their complete lifecycle from design until they are retired. But from our point of view, a single full lifecycle API management is outdated. So what are you supposed to do next? And that is what we will be talking about in this episode. But first, let's make a case for why we think that one single full lifecycle management is just not the way you should be working today, and especially not tomorrow and going forward. And of course, I can tell you that, all of the other APIIDA guys can tell you that, but it's even better if some other people in the industry tell you that. So let me start with some quotes. So first one is, many of us still see the gateway as just another piece of infrastructure, rather than the programmatic commodity baked into the fabric of the cloud and increasingly across the enterprise. And this was said by Kin Lane. And if you don't know Kin Lane, he has written numerous books on API management. And he also blogs under the name API Evangelist and has a big following on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and is basically one of the thought leaders in the API management industry. But there are more people that share the same view on API management. Anthony Duega, who is one of the partners of APIThings, has said integration is the new lock-in feature. And he's basically right, because if you are just locked in that one lifecycle management system, it's hard to get out. It's hard to add a second or third one. It's hard to change, to migrate. We have done so successfully with workloads. So workloads used to be the lock-in feature. Once you're in Azure, you will not ever migrate to AWS. Now all of us are running Kubernetes clusters. All of us are running OpenShift. We're using Terraform, and all of these tools basically allow you to move your workflows where you see fit. But with the API management space, this hasn't started yet. Another quote, the industry movement towards gateways exposing open APIs and API management tools that can operate gateways from multiple vendors indicates that in the long term, gateways may become a commodity. And actually, this sentence is a quote from Gartner's Market Guide for API Gateways. So if you're in the marketplace right now for an API gateway, you ask one of the industry experts, and basically Gartner is the biggest analyst in the space. Even Gartner tells you, yeah, you're looking for a gateway right now, but be aware that looking for a gateway isn't something that you should be doing in the future. In the future, gateways become a commodity. So be sure what you are doing right now. And another quote, traditionally more centralized approaches, which are centralize what you can, not what you have to, may have to give way to more decentralized strategies. Centralize what you must and decentralize everything else, of thinking about enterprise and IT architecture. And that quote is by Erik Wilde, who is also one of the thought leaders in the space. By the way, he has a very good YouTube channel. So if you are interested in some good content around APIs and API management, make sure to check his channel as well. And to give you one last quote, if the API landscape of a company is heterogeneous and highly complex, how can a closed system deal with it? Well, the answer is easy, it can't. And that's actually one of my quotes. So if you have been following me, or if you've been following APIIDA throughout the years, you know that we have published a lot of blogs, a lot of videos, a lot of conference talks, exactly speaking about that thing, about heterogeneous infrastructures, about complex API landscapes and how to master them. And we have worked with numerous customers, and basically that's the essence of it. If you have a really complex setup, or if you plan to be more complex, more free in your decisions, then using just one system probably won't cut it for you. But that leaves us with the question. So if we don't have that one lifecycle system that takes care of the lifecycle, what does our API landscape in the company look like? And for many companies, it looks like this. So you have all different kinds of systems, all different kinds of tooling that work with or around your APIs. So you have API gateways, you have repositories, you have some CI/CD pipelines, service meshes, you have some services, especially for end-to-end testing of your APIs. You have design tools, right? So, and while all of these services are included in a full lifecycle management tool, for most companies, they not use everything that's in the full lifecycle. And if you have deployed multiple of these solutions, or if you just don't have that one lifecycle solution, you might even, like in this example, end up with a situation where you have like two different networks of meshed services that kind of work together, sometimes not. And it's really hard to keep track on, where is basically the source of truth for that API? Where is it defined? Is it the documentation? Is it the Postman collection? Is it the code that's in its repository? Is it the version that's actually running on one of your gateways? So it's hard to keep track about which APIs do you actually run? How do you run them? And what's your golden master? And this is exactly where we come in, where we think we can provide a ton of value, and where we think that by changing the way you work and by deploying federated API management into your landscape, that you can really make a difference here. So we basically want to, build a meta system that is capable of just keeping track everything that happens within your API landscape, and that acts as that source of truth, so that you know exactly what happens in your system. So if we look at that from another perspective, we have that one core, right? So the heart of your API landscape, if you want to put it that way. And this core is responsible for discovering, for provisioning, and to secure all of the APIs in the enterprise. So that's the one single point of truth that you have in the enterprise. What APIs are there? How do I provision them? How are they secured? Are they even secure? Because the worst thing that can happen is that some zombie APIs show up, which basically no one knows where they come from. No one knows what they do. No one knows who's responsible, but everyone is afraid to stop them because there might be some business associated to it. So that is the heart, that is the core. And everything around that is something where you should use the best tool that's available, the best tool that fits your use case. So for example, API design. I think most of the companies out there use Postman for API design, and that's fine. Why should you switch to the design solution of a full lifecycle API management platform if Postman is what you use and what you're successful with and that you have established in the company? It's the same for every other thing out there, for testing, for creating mocks for your APIs. Why should you limit yourself to the possibilities that that one lifecycle management tool has? No, you should use the tool that works best in your infrastructure, that works best in your environment, that works best for your people. And as we heard from Gartner, the gateways are also becoming a part of this use whatever fits the scenario. So up until now, the gateway was that central element. And basically all of the full lifecycle management system, they are built around the gateway. It's not like you have that registry, you have that catalog, and then it revolves everything around that. No, the companies usually created a gateway first. And then afterwards, they created management tooling for that gateway. And then somebody came along and said, oh, you know, the lifecycle starts with design. We should add design to it. Oh yeah, that's great. Let's add design to it. But how do we add design to it? Well, the easiest way possible so that it works with our gateway and so on. So this was made for all of the components, which basically means that while some of the components of lifecycle management or full lifecycle management, traditional one, are very good, usually there's something out there that's even better. And again, according to Gartner and according to us, gateways will become one of these components that you can just switch, that you can replace. And that brings us to, you know, the view on how important is which aspect of API management. So this core, this single point of truth, that's basically what you want to have covered from a strategic perspective. So you want to know what APIs are there. You want to govern these APIs. You want to steer them in a direction, right? So you have your goals and you have your strategy that bring you to your goal. So you now need a system that can execute this strategy, that keeps track of everything that's happening. This tool, it must not do with the things itself. So it must not do with the design. It must not do, serving the requests. But it has absolutely to keep track of it to make sure that everything that is done in your API landscape goes according to your API strategy. And if you look at that slide and remember the quote from Eric, well, basically centralize what you must. And these are the essential elements that you should centralize in your enterprise. It is of no value if you have your APIs scattered in 10 different systems and you don't have a central discovery. You don't have one central place where everyone can go to, look at what APIs there are, check their documentation, check their specs, get access to them. If that is scattered in 10 different places as well, there is no value for your consumer. There is no good adoption, but we will hear about that in a minute. But designing, developing, executing these APIs in the gateway, testing these APIs, that is something that you don't have to centralize. And remember the quote, if you don't have to centralize it, don't do it, decentralize it. Good thing is that every team can now choose their technology to their liking, right? So if they want to use Postman, be my guest. If they want to use Stoplight, as well. If they want to use this testing tool or this testing tool, go ahead, right? Just make sure there's that core. So every API that is designed is registered somewhere, and that every API that's tested gets its information from somewhere. So the testing tool needs the specifications, for example. Otherwise, it doesn't know what to test. So where does the testing tool get its information from? From 10 different designs tools? No. It has to get its information from the single point of truth, and that is the heart, that is the core of your API landscape. And if you build your API landscape in that way, you can leverage some great benefits. So let's look at the first part. Catalog and manage access on any platform. So that is what I just said. Your APIs might be scattered in multiple systems. It might not only be REST APIs, you might also have some event-driven platforms, right? Kafka, MQTT, what comes to your mind? You might even have some old batch-based systems. So bring them all together in one central location, because that means that consumers, if they are looking for an API, they have just one place to go to, not 10. They don't need to know in advance where to go to. They just go into that one place and they have a look at, oh, that's the API. I can use that. Great. I don't have to create it on my own. Somebody already created it. How does it work? Oh, here's specification. I don't have access. All right. One mouse click and now I have access. So what you get here is you get an increased adoption and increased reuse. because everyone that needs data can check your catalog beforehand, before she tries to recreate the wheel. And you have like 5 APIs basically spitting out the same set of data. You have accelerated time to value or time to market because everything's in one place. The API, who is responsible, what's the documentation like, what's the specification like, bingo. And of course, developers love that. Developers hate to have to search for everything. They are just used to, find all the information in one place. So a lot of, software programming languages, they have dedicated packet managers. And if you try to find something to reuse a certain library, you go to that package manager and you search for it. And there it is. And it tells you, oh, to install it, use this. Oh, by the way, here's the documentation. And developers are used to that. And you should bring that developer experience to your API program as well. So next thing is you need to get your APIs on these different runtimes. You need to provision them. You need to you need to version them, right? You need to sunset them eventually. Now, the problem is how to do that from a central location or from workflows within your company if you are not really sure where is that API running, or just having like 10 different processes because you have 10 different API platforms. So by using one central core, one central heart of your API landscape to do these tasks, you reduce complexity big time. So that will improve your productivity. It will improve your velocity, because imagine this: if there is a request on the business side of things, what usually happens is, okay, now the backend adapts, we need a change in the API contract for that change to be, provisioned to production. Now the API contract, the API proxy, as we call it, that might be the responsibility of a different team. Most of the time, there's a dedicated operations team for that very API gateway. So you have a handoff there. If you are able to leverage API ops, if you are able to leverage DevOps in such an environment, in such a heterogeneous environment, you basically eliminate these bottlenecks and you optimize for flow throughout your whole organization, so you get faster. And whenever you're faster and whenever you reduce complexity, you save a lot of money as well. And in landscapes that are very, very complex, as I said, you might find some shadow APIs, some zombie APIs no one knows about. Now that is a nightmare for audits and for compliance reports and all of that stuff. So it's important to have that heart, that central element that basically brings together all the API, that knows about all the APIs, and that is capable of assessing them. Is the security good? Is the quality good? Does it meet our guidelines? So if you come to, or if you arrive at a situation where you can really leverage that single source of truth for auditing IT security, then you have the big time reduced risk of data breaches, and security audits are really, really easy. So you have a great increase in governance, in security, and so on. So, all right, so we don't use full lifecycle tools anymore, or full lifecycle management platforms anymore. We use, a load of tools together that are, with a centralized tracker. So is it just a new tool we're talking about? No, we also talk about a fundamental change in perception. So the role of API management will change. So it has been a primarily tactical one in the past. So why do you need API management? Well, you needed it from a technological point of view, and it doesn't have so much effect on the business. The APIs themselves, yeah, okay, that's easy to get. If the API is bad, business is bad. API is good, business is bad. All right, so we understand that. The management of APIs, now you just have to do it. Security, governance, yeah, you just have to do it in order to make your API successful. In the future, what we firmly believe is API management will be a strategic topic, because we've seen that all the technical stuff, that's not at the core of your API landscape. That's in the outside. That's replaceable. That's strictly tactical. but the APIs, their quality, how they are built, guidelines for design, their life cycle, having a great developer experience, that is something that in the future will directly impact your business results. Because it's not just the API, but it's the way people work with the API, the way people find the API. And this will become a source of differentiation with the competition. So let me give you an example. There are like multiple, payment services out there that, websites, applications, other companies can use, right? So there are literally hundreds of them. However, there's one very clear market leader, and their market leader, so I'm talking about Stripe, they are market leader not because the APIs are great. Yes, they are great. Not because they have the, the best website out there, make the best marketing. Developer experience has always been outstanding with them. So people it was really easy for developers to incorporate it into their applications. They have really great management. They do versioning right. So if you want to have a look at a good API program, look at theirs. And that is what I mean, right? So by getting API management right, not the execution, not the design, not the technical stuff, but management of the API itself, by getting that right, they basically captured the whole market. And if API management is becoming such an important thing in the future and a strategic topic, then of course you might want to know, okay, how mature is our API management? How do we stack up against the other guys in the industry? What are we doing good? What are we doing bad? And to answer that question, we have developed an API maturity assessment, which is in the final phase of redactions, some small changes here and there. Whenever or when you want to be notified when it's available, you can follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter on our website. And the moment it is available, which should be coming days, coming weeks, you get notified and you can actually assess yourself in a quick summary, a very short questionnaire, or you can go for the more detailed route with some of our guys that basically do an interview with you. And then you get exactly a report on how you stack up with API management. But of course, as you know, APIIDA is quite a technical company, right? So, I mean, we love to talk strategy. We love to talk the greater scheme of things. But at the end of the day, we also really are, love technology. So if we want to build a system like that, what are the changes in technology that will happen? So first of all, we might need to take a look at something that's called a multi-plane architecture. This is something that is not new, has been around for ages. But to illustrate the wording that we will use throughout now, let's have a close look at it. So for every IT system, there are multiple planes. So you have some management plane, which is the highest layer that there is, and it basically defines configuration, it manages processes, stuff like if you think about APIs, for example, the analytics, access policies, now who can access this API and so on. Now, note that for everything that's happening in the management plane, you don't need to know anything on the systems that actually do the work, right? So who can access it? You can configure that without knowing where it will be executed. Analytics, yeah, just give me the data. Where do they come from? I don't care. Now, one layer beneath is the control plane that takes care of more security related thing of like traffic policies, traffic shaping, rate limits, like please do not overload my system, right? For example. And what it basically does is it applies the configuration that the management plane did to the different data planes. Which means that the control plane needs to be aware of these data planes and it needs to know how to talk to these data planes. In case of API management, that's where the policies go down, the metrics go up, and the data plane itself finally is where actually the bytes are processed, right? So request goes in, it's sanitized, it's vetted, it's sent to the backend, and it comes back. So in the data plane, these policies that have been defined by the above layers are executed, right? They are enforced there. Now, the management plane and the control plane, those two are tightly coupled, because the control plane basically can't apply any configuration of the management plane if they are not tightly coupled, right? And the management plane, of course, cannot define any configuration that the control plane is unable to apply. So what you usually end up with is a two-plane architecture. And if we apply that to API management, it kind of looks like that, where in the data plane, you have your API gateway itself, the service implementation, so your backend. And in the control plane, which brings together control and management plane, you have usually the developer portal and the administration portal, where you define all the policies, where you define who is access, where you define how an API is to be secured. And that is enforced in the data plane. Now, if you think about API gateways, what you need to do is to make them available as close to the service you are proxying as possible, right? So there's no value in having an on-prem service and you route all of the traffic to it through a cloud gateway, right? So because that means that just the gateway is so apart from the service implementation that your network topology isn't optimal. So if you have your service implementation, your backends in different places, you probably also have multiple gateways. And if we add that to the picture, we arrive at something that is called Federated API Management. So you still have one control plane, you have one developer portal, you have one administration portal, but that is now connected to multiple data planes. There might be a data plane on-prem, there might be a data plane in a cloud provider, in a second cloud provider, maybe some niche thing like for IoT. Maybe that's your SAP environment, whatever. So your control plane is connected to multiple data planes. And what's special about Federated API Management is that these data planes, they don't need to be from the same vendor, right? So your gateways, your API gateways running inside these data planes, they don't need to be from the same vendor. You can mix and match whatever fits your need in that situation. So you still have an on-premise installation of, let's say, a Broadcom layer 7 or X-Way or whatever you have. And you also have services running cloud native in Azure. Well, that's great. Use Azure's API gateway for it because it is as close to your backend system as possible. And now you have two different API gateways. You have two different management interfaces. You have two different workflows to provision APIs. Don't do that. Just attach both of these data planes to one centralized control plane to get the benefits we have been talking about. So this control plane, what should be that the capabilities of that control plane if you're in the marketplace looking for one? Well, of course, it should be able to discover all the APIs and their specs from the different systems that you attach to it, right? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to recreate all your APIs in that control plane. No, you want to, set up the control plane. You want to give it the data to connect to your different data planes, and then you want to click like one button, and all of your existing APIs should show up in the system, right? So because we're adding another system to the mix, and we don't want to have a lot of more work. So the API control plane should be able to do that automatically. It shouldn't need any custom development, any custom connectors. If you have a very special case, then of course it should have the capability to use and create a custom connector, but you shouldn't need to, right? So if someone offers you a control plane and says, yeah, but all the integration is custom, if you ask me, that's a red flag. Control plane should always be able to manage the consumer application and the API keys, right? Because you want that one place where consumers go, and you want that one place where they can request access, and you want to give them the access right away, self-service. Of course, there are like approval workflows, right? So that not everyone can subscribe to your APIs without any checks, but they should be as self-service as possible. And of course, you want to gather analytics data. So you want to know that application that used this API, this API, this API. 1,000 calls, 5,000 calls, 1 million calls, whatever. You don't want to jump into multiple systems to know the usage of your APIs. And if, for example, a consuming application is adhering to your fair use policy, if it's a good citizen, or if it kind of exploits your APIs, you want to know that. A control plane should also be able to provision and migrate APIs around in your environment. It might not necessarily need to move an API from one vendor to another vendor, but it should be able to move APIs from development stage to production stage within the same vendor. So that's for sure, because you don't want to have like additional processes. If the control plane is the single source of truth, it knows about the different versions, it knows about the different environments, and it can just make sure this API is at the right spot at the right time. It should be able to scan all your APIs for security and for quality issues. Now, we see a lot of security scanners out there. Basically, most of them tend to scan the same things, but there are lots of them, right? But there are far fewer scanners for quality, and that is important as well, because of course you want your API to be secure. No question about that, right? So if the control plane has no security scan functionality, no good. But what you also want is you want a high quote of reusability. And reusability is not about security. Reusability is about quality. So make sure you have high quality APIs that look the same, that feel the same, that have good descriptions, good documentation. So your control plane should be able to check for that. And something that we believe a good control plane should also do is be able to create API proxies on the fly based on some specification. So what you usually do is you have to do some setup routine in your API gateway. You have to, create an API proxy. That should be the task of the control plane, and ideally in a way that you can reuse, right? So you write that specification once, and then today you push it to your Broadcom infrastructure. Tomorrow you push it to another infrastructure. Maybe that doesn't work out. So day after tomorrow, you go back to your Broadcom infrastructure, whatever. So your control plane should be able to do so. And everything that we just discussed, so all the capabilities, that is what we created our API control plane for. The launch event for that product is December 1st. So if you haven't done so, register now. You can do so on our webpage. You can do so via LinkedIn and all of the other social media accounts that we have. And on December 1st, we will reveal the product. We will have some great speakers, some great keynotes, and just a great event focused around Federated API Management and the product that we then bring to the market and then is then available for the general public. So let's look at some use cases, right? So we have been talking about the shift, the fundamental shift in API management, the new era of API management, like we want to call it. You also find us using the notion of API management 3.0. If you are interested in why 3.0, go to our website, go into the blog. I wrote an article on that. And we also took a look at the architecture that enables this, the capabilities that enable this. And now let's look at some of the use cases that you are able to do using that technology and using that architectural pattern, so that you can really see that it's not just talk, right? So you can really get work done with it. So of course, most common scenario that we currently see with customers is like they have an on-prem API gateway, and now they're trying or they're starting to shift to the cloud, which basically means they create cloud native services. And as I've said, always put your gateway as close to your service as possible, which means don't route it through your old API gateway on-prem, doesn't make sense. Use the cloud native gateway, the gateway that your cloud provider offers. And this is a very common scenario that we see happening right now. and bring them all both together, because if you have such an API marketplace, if you have a developer portal, of course you want to manage both of the gateways, right? So you want to see all of the APIs, not only one or the other, but both at the same time. Again, your consumers should not have to know in advance where to go. They just go to your marketplace and say, oh, look, I want that API. A consumer does not care where you run it technically. So to expand on this, we have like unified API catalogs and governance. So for example, you might have some unstructured data sources that you put behind an API gateway that has integration capabilities, right? So you create REST APIs that are based on your unstructured sources or on some SQL databases or whatever. You might have existing APIs, like, for example, what your ERP system offers. So those usually have huge APIs. And you might have some other interfaces that I mentioned before, some legacy stuff, some bulk stuff, and you want to bring it all to one unified catalog, and you want to put that lean governance on top of it, making sure that everyone plays by the rules, that you know, all that you have to do for IT security to be compliant is actually done and it's secured in a uniform way. And that is actually also a quite common use case because what we see is a trend to do citizen development. So you have like your teams within the company, and they want to build application. They want to build workflows. They might want to train some machine learning systems, which basically means they need data, right? They need data, they need functionality. And you don't want like 100 teams, you know, basically bombing your backend teams with requests like, how does it work? I need access. Or come on, guys, I don't understand it. Can you tell me how that works? So bring that all together into that one catalog. Make sure you have the governance on top so that your consumers know what to expect. And then you can do all these things. Then you can do citizen development. You don't want your consumers to talk directly to the data warehouse guys. Never a good idea. Another thing you can do is you can now do branch shops. So for example, you have one consolidated architecture that execute your APIs, that you use to manage your APIs, but to the outside, you have multiple brands that are disjunct from each other. So brand A, brand B, and brand C, they are all different to each other. They might offer a different set of APIs. They might connect to a different identity provider. But of course, you don't want to have like 3 separated infrastructures, right? So you want synergies there. You want to use the effect of scale there. So bring it all together, put it into one control plane, and inside the control plane, then you can build out these different brands, and you can isolate the different brands from each other, and then have different brand shops where the consumers basically only get to see the APIs that are interesting for them and can only subscribe to these APIs. Last but not least, a very common use case for federated API management are group structures. So you might have a group that is comprised of multiple business units, and these business units might have been acquired through a merger, for example, or you just have to happen in IT infrastructure in each of the business units. So there are approaches where like the business units are free to do what they think best fits their business. But of course, that means that you have like different API platforms in the different business units. And now, usually when we talk about governance, governance is a central, is something that the group IT, the central IT has to guarantee. Like, okay, group IT guarantee me for all of my business units that everyone is playing according to the rules. So here again, put that API control plane in the middle of it, connect all the different platforms, and then just streamline that data up and make sure governance is enforced. And that can be done by, you know, attaching these platforms to the control plane. Then you have one place where you can do governance for all of the business units without taking away their freedom. They can still run their platform. they can still do whatever they please with the platform as long as it is according to the rules of the group. And same is with accounting, for example. So if you have like shared billing or something like that, you need to make sure that every business unit pays its fair share. So how can you do that? Well, of course, you need to know the usage of each business unit compared to the other business units. And that means that you basically, again, have to centralize this information, then you can act on it. And that allows for the group IT to actually do what it's supposed to be doing, to not really be a gatekeeper, but be more kind of an enabler. Because if you have a setup like this, you can really do whatever you want in the business unit. If not, you have to do some very strict regulations, like you are allowed to use that, but not that, because you can just not look into the business unit. So to wrap it up, what we heard today in this webinar, API management is changing. It's changing fast and it's changing a lot. So the maturity and the ability to execute in this domain will become a competitive differentiator. If your API management is not mature, you will lose business in the future. So you really have to be up to the game with your API management execution. And Federated API Management is the architectural pattern that does solve these upcoming challenges and that enables all these benefits that you can leverage. So it not only solves your problems, but it also gives you a lot of benefits, a lot of more room to maneuver your company, more speed, more governance, more compliance. And that is exactly what you want to have in the marketplace. And if you're going for Federated API Management, well, then you need that heart. You need that control plane. That's the most important component in a Federated API Management. Whenever you have like a data plane that's not performing, you can replace it. You can just use another data plane. But if your central, if your heart, if your core does not perform, then the whole Federated API Management architecture of yours has a problem, right? So make sure that your core is up to the task. So that was basically the topic of today. As you've seen, we are offering a product that takes care of Federated API Management. Now, if you don't know us, if you don't know APIIDA, then of course, why should you work with us? Well, we are doing more than just providing you with a great product to use as your core in your API landscape. So, we work directly with our customers. We create API management roadmaps. We take a very close look at where you're at, how do you want to work in the future, and what is your strategy to get from point A to point B. As I said earlier, we have that maturity assessment. We also are able to calculate value of API management in our return of API calculator. So we make that value visible and we make your ability to execute visible, which is important because you cannot improve what you can't measure. And finally, of course, we have the experience to make it work, right? So we have done lots of projects around the world with tons of customers, and basically the customers are really happy about our services. We have a net promoter score of over 52. So basically that is why we are just not a product shop. We give you a great product that will allow you to master API management, but we can also support you of getting there. So that was it from my side. And I think, Armin, now you want to introduce our participants here, our audience, to the coming episodes in this series.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcus. Before we go through the next upcoming episodes, we have actually received two questions that I'd like to ask you to tackle. The one is, how do you actually integrate different vendors, given that they typically have different sets of capabilities?
Yeah, so this is like, our secret sauce, if you will. Now, it's basically what we are doing is because we have some great, experience in the field. We basically know all of these systems very well. We know all of the concepts very well. So while on the first look, you might say, okay, this platform doesn't support feature A and this doesn't support feature B. Most of the time, there is a way to make it work, right? So we're not trying to do one-to-one conversions, but what we do is we basically try to grasp the idea of what the user did want to do and translate that into a language that the target platform understands. Of course, there might be some edge cases that we not support, but from the projects that we have done yet, I can say that in most of the cases, there is a way to make it work, and there is a standardized way to make it work. So in theory, there are these problems. In practice, these are by far not as big as one might think.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Marcus. And the other question we received is somewhat along the lines, I think. But so it's you talked about API specifications. So do you think there is a vendor-independent language to define and provision APIs?
There's the vendor, so there are vendor independent specifications for how to consume an API, right? So most well known is the Open API specification. I myself, I'm on the board of the Open API initiative. So of course, this is one very important initiative for the whole API management industry. Everyone uses that. When it comes to provisioning APIs and like a definition on how they are to be secured, like against what identity provider do you need to authenticate, with what type of technology do you need to authenticate? Do you need to do some transformation of your data, something like that? That is where there's currently no vendor independent spec available, but we as APIIDA are working on one. And when we have completed the work and when we are happy with the results, then we will probably open source that and basically, give that to the world in order for all the other tool makers to adopt. But right now, this is where the scene is a bit lacking and where we actively try to improve the situation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcus. And thank you all for having joined us today. Our webinar series on Federated API Management will commence on November 14th, 4 p.m. Central European Time, with a session on improving the developer experience and accelerate time to market with Federated API Management. Make sure you register on apiida.com/webinars, and see you next time. Thank you.